Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone across the world. You're welcome to the ALA African Literature Association lecture series, the first in the academic year 2021-2022. My name is Akinyade Shokon. I teach comparative literature and African cinema at Indiana University, Bloomington. And it's been my pleasure to coordinate this series with my colleagues in the Executive Council of the Association, especially Matt Brown of the University of Wisconsin in Madison, and James Makoko of William and Hobart College in Geneva, New York. The series began last year as an initiative suggested by the immediate past president of the association, Girma Negash of Ohio State University. And this year it has received the support of the Executive Council, especially of the current president, Mohammed Kamara of Washington Lee University, who is a co-organizer of the series. Similarly, we'd like to acknowledge the continuing support of the other members of the council, as well as the larger membership of the association. Due to your continuing attention and attendance, the series has come to stand in the past year as a publicly engaged feature of the association's presence in this age when public engagement is roughly equivalent to the socially and civically responsive. Thank you, everyone. Today's lecture is the first one in this academic year, and it will be given by the art historian and philosopher, Professor Nkiru Nzegwu of State University of New York, SUNY, Binghamton. Professor Nzegwu is Distinguished Professor of the university's Department of Africana Studies, as well as the chair of the board of SUNY Distinguished Academy and the founder of African Knowledge Project that publishes or curates a range of journals and platforms, including West Africa Review and Gender. She is the author or editor of many books, of which Family Matters, Feminist Concepts in African Philosophy of Culture, The New African Diaspora, Onitsha at the Millennium, Legacy, History, and Transformation, and His Majesty Nnaemeka, Alfred, Ugochukwu, Achebe, a 10-year milestone, are just a few. What makes Professor Nzegwu's appearance on this series significant is an often overlooked but ever-present fact. That is, the structured division of our contemporary realities into a number of discrete disciplinary compartments, such that generating intelligible ideas about those realities become both necessary and Herculean. For an example, she's known to lecture widely in places like South Africa, Australia, United Kingdom, and Nigeria to audiences of philosophers or art historians. While those audiences are well chosen and do make use of our insights, we in the association figure that her compelling and generative insights could very well enrich attempts in literary studies to embrace new methods and trouble the unsustainable divisions that have characterized the study of African and various subaltern and even supposedly mainstream experiences, practices, and systems. For another example, her lecture today, titled Achebe Aesthetics, even in its description, makes no apologies about its methodological and pedagogical objectives and the political needs to connect those objectives to lived experience across time and space, and especially in recent experience, even when those come to her through objects of representation. She is, of course, here to speak for herself, and so this is the moment for me to turn the screen over to her. She has her own microphone. Professor Nzegwu, you are on.
Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody from wherever your location happens to be. And I'd like to thank the executive of the African Literature Association for inviting me for this lecture and in organizing the wonderful way of communicating across time and space. And given that time and space is a central core of my lecture today, I am very thankful that I am speaking through this medium. There's a couple of things I would like to, perfunctory remarks I would like to make before I really start my lecture, which is to say that for over a decade, I've literally tapered down my publications in the arts, art history, aesthetics. Not because I have nothing to say, but because it's a time of that I have gone into deep reflection, bringing philosophical issues to bear in terms of how we actually have conceptualized African aesthetics. And when I say Africa and African, that way of speaking does not undermine the idea that there are multiplicity of cultures in Africa, multiplicity of features and peoples in Africa. But at the very core, there's a unity that goes across that geographical space, that what we identified in one specific zone resonates in the other. Additionally, for the past number of years, I've been teaching a course on the genesis or the beginning of art in time. And with Africa as the sole focus, I have had to go back to as far back as the Khoisan of Southern Africa to begin to rethink and understand what African art is about, not how African art is conceptualized through the frame of Western aesthetics, which is grounded on modernity, which was conceptualized in the crucible of racism and racism as a core and colonialism. So those two combined forces actually leads to the denigration of what constitutes knowledge of the peoples of Africa and of African descent, as well as peoples of other cultures and regions of the world. So it was crucial to anchor and move out of the Western aesthetics. And given how we have been trained, there's a tendency to slide into the value or valuation of what that aesthetics is about. I'm going to share my screen because I want to begin to showcase some of the things I'm talking about. Okay. Just a minute. Okay. I share aesthetics. So one of the things, some of the fundamental issues I've been looking at coalesce around the idea of Achebe aesthetics. But Achebe as a concept does not entirely imply that I am going to be talking specifically about the Yoruba culture. But the Yoruba culture provides the crucible from which this concept manifests, which I have now taken over as a loan word. However, in doing that, I have had to pay attention to how it has been articulated, related to the ways in which other cultures have related what constitutes Achebe in their own locales, but more importantly, still adhere to the Yoruba conceptualization, because there's been tremendous literature that has been forthcoming in that zone. So while looking at Achebe aesthetics, some of the things that actually did come up was the constitution of reality, the fundamental structure of the world, issues of knowledge, which is epistemology, issues of metaphysics, ethics. So a whole range of ideas come together, converge to produce what is Achebe aesthetics. And so when we begin to talk about Achebe aesthetics, it appears when the hegemonic veil of Western ideology is pulled aside. So the revealed aesthetics manifest in a polychronal spatiality that is anomalous and constant. And I talk about polychronal spatiality, and it wasn't until a few days ago before this lecture that it occurred to me that I could replace the term polychronal spatiality with the more appropriate one, which is Achebe spatiality. But this spatiality is anomalous and constant. It changes, it diverges, it reverts on itself, but at the same time, it's constant in a certain way. An artistic activity within this frame, objectives of creativity, and the role of art forms unfold in a dynamic matrix of interconnectivity in which the past and the future are inscribed in the present. So art forms are unbound and infinitely generative, and when they are concretized, Achebe, and come alive when activated. So what is Achebe, and what does Achebe art form, what does it state about art forms and the relationship of art, human creativity, and reality? So this is what my talk will be doing. And towards the end, I'm going to take time off to do an aesthetic evaluation of the iconic George Floyd Mural in Minneapolis and the BLM Routine of the diversity dance group in Britain. Please note this trajectory. I am not taking Achebe aesthetics to investigate the art in Africa or the ancient art. By moving it to the present and looking to the future, I'm making a potent and important philosophical case that this conception is relevant to the current world, but in addition, the current works, contemporary works that are being produced outside of Africa in different zones are actually based and built on the notion of Achebe aesthetics, which they are, in a sense, releasing to the world. And in fact, some of these works are already working. And so in doing the evaluation, I want to bring out ways in which this aesthetics is already in operation in our contemporary reality and is defining where the future lies, not where the past was. So polychronal spatiality. So we tend to think of time as one-dimensional, with everyone living in the same timeline and space-time. But in actuality, we live in different temporalities and spatialities. So the idea of polychronal spatiality speaks to the multiplicity of timelines and spatialities, even within the same geographical space. And within it, time and space overlaps, interweaves, and interleaves, diverges. So what is this about this polychronal spatiality? What do I mean? How can there be multiplicity of timelines when you are living in the same geographical space? Think about it. Many people who live in Black definite realities, particularly in North America and in Europe, who live in the same geographical space with their white neighbors, but whose reality, value system, cultures are outside of the mainstream, live actually in a different spatiality and timeline, even as they reside in the same geographical space. So they get to know and see what the other is thinking, but the other doesn't even see and recognize their own differences. This is an instance of being in the same geographical space, but living in different timelines and spatialities. Another example is when, during ceremonies, particularly in various points of Africa, and in the creation of art, works that are produced to engage the departed. So we talk of the other world. We talk of preparing a funeral ceremony because we have to be sure that the person enters into the other world and for them to take their place within the cause or the ancestors. That is another redefinition of space and time, because to be able to give intelligibility to that idea, you are actually reconceptualizing space, reconceptualizing time to extend beyond what we understand as a regular three-dimensional space. You have extended it to a region and a place that normally does not function. And we know that this extension has significance and meaning because when we do that, we give agency and priority to that other world. That is what changes what we do in this world. We give agency to that reality and that space-time, because that space-time and reality, given where they are, given that they are the place of ancestors, they have a way of rebounding and reacting on our own timeline. So that's another ways in which, even though people are living in the same geographical space, the way they conceptualize their reality, the way they live their reality, and the ways they produce works speaks to that nuanced understanding of reality and the shifting of time and space. Now, usually when we're dealing with African philosophy or African art and African aesthetic, people don't give that level of sophistication to the African ways of thinking, because the reality that has constructed Africa in this our current post-colonial reality, or I should say neo-colonial reality, is the one that leaves it at the level of underdevelopment of thought, underdevelopment of philosophy, not one that actually grasps and understands the sophisticated ways in which people are thinking. So critical historiography, which I owe that term to Professor Olabi Yiyai, reveals that there are three final features in historiography. Temporal sequence of things, which is the ways in which in the polychronal spatiality, there is constancy. Territorial centering of traditions, traditions become central. And it's within that centering of tradition that some of the anomalous ways in which this polychronal spatiality operates becomes manifest. And the last one is there are intellectual heritages. And within those intellectual heritages, within those places where we think and talk about art, actually, there is illuminative discourses that aid enlightenment. Now, but these intellectual heritages actually take place in local languages. But because the other doesn't understand many of these languages, they do not have access to what the culture is saying about its art. Therefore, it rules those art as dumb, nothing to say. So it becomes art only when they have now deemed this work as art. What a height of ignorance and hypocrisy. So, although the word Ashe is Yoruba, the idea and the concept are not limited to the Yoruba alone. Other communities on the continent and in the diaspora have it. So you have Nyama in the Mande people. Characterizations of this form of Ashe also emerges in the even in the Igbo language when they talk of that essence, that energy as a bili, which means it moves in a wave-like manner. And then within the sun of Southern Africa, the conceptualization of that energy and vibration is like electricity. Its power, its force moves like electricity. So those are some of the things that I have brought together in this extended work on Ashe aesthetics. But unfortunately, given the time frame that I have and we have, I cannot present all of that. But I can sing about it for days on end without stopping, except that many of you would have to drop out. So Ashe underlies the art of indigenous people around the world and in the Americas, art, Australia and Africa, as well as in Europe too. Towards the end of the lecture, I'll give you a brief example of how this Ashe aesthetics is working in the border areas of the United States and Mexico, of contemporary artists who are, I call border artists, are actually utilizing or deploying the Ashe principles in the creation of their work, even though they don't call it Ashe. So Ashe is a universal rather than a provincial idea. Because of the global spread of the word Ashe to almost all regions of the world, I use it primarily as a loan word that can be substituted for the local equivalents. However, one can still utilize Ashe and keep Ashe as the dominant word because in the spread of the Yoruba religion and in the spread of the Orisha formulation of life, Ashe has moved to practically every single continent in the world. In Russia, you have Orisha worshippers. Australia, New Zealand, England, or UK, North America, there are houses of Ashe worship. South America, the same occurs. So Ashe is a word that has, in a sense, attained global significance. And Ashe, even as it's used in those areas, still retains the essence of what my talk today is about. So introducing Ashe in art. So it enunciates a complex philosophy of creativity, artistic expressions, and artistic forms that evoke, activate, and actualize Ashe. It's a complex word for power, authority, command, scepter, the vital force in all living and non-living things, a coming to pass of an utterance. So there is a whole constellation of meanings that oftentimes you really have to critically analyze the work or the areas or the philosophy you engaged in to be able to understand when Ashe is functioning as energy, when it's functioning as vibration or vital force, and be able to understand what it's about. So Ashe, so what I'm going to do is briefly give some discussions on some of the things that I have I want to highlight. Now, when Ashe utilized as a command, Ashe offers an emphatic affirmation that what is willed, asked, said, or created will come to be or pass. A short declaratory assertion, Ashe, meaning so will it be, follows whatever physical or social action or a mental or psychological activity that correlate to the desired intent. The declaration Ashe states that the intent, which could be a prayer or utterance, must come to pass. This verbal exhortation activates the intent. The activation ignites the power of those objects and unleashes them to act, that is, brings them to life. It enables the objects to transform their surroundings in accord with their intrinsic artistic objectives. So essentially, what this principle of activation is stating is that the intent, object, action, or activity has become the willed Ashe. Ashe creativity speaks to manifold levels of relationships between artist, object, and audience. But a key question is, how does an inert, tangible form that is an object function like an intangible, vital energy? First, as manifestations of will, objects, actions, and activity. And when I think of activity, I'm thinking of motion, kinesthetic works. Actions can be what has been produced, literature, it could also poetry, what is the oral poetry that is recited. Objects could be painting, murals on the wall. As manifestations of will, all objects, actions, and activity are concretized Ashe or energy. They embody and possess vitality. Their embodied energy vibrates and interacts with the surrounding Achebe life force, which envelops the world to bring about the intended object. So creativity is fundamentally an attunement in and working with Achebe so that the objects produced are intrinsically extensions of Achebe. The type of forms and objects that I have classified under Achebe aesthetics possess a different character from other fabrications and creations. The difference lies in their activation. The objects or artistic forms that are within this classification have been switched on, quote unquote, switched on. That is, they have been empowered to embark on their intrinsic mission. Whereas there may not be much difference or visual difference between two types of forms, the inactivated ones possess this capability in latency. But insofar as their powers have not been turned on, like many art objects that are out there, they are inert, waiting to be enlivened. So I want to talk a little bit about the cosmogony of Achebe spatiality. The linkage of the principle of activation to Achebe and of Achebe to art centers a specific philosophy. This is a philosophy of existence that states life is irreducibly energy and that energy constitutes life. Both resides in every form and that every form has a vibrational register. All artistic forms are constituted by energy. Hence, all forms vibrate at its own register that is specific to them. It is the activation of this embodied energy of vibration that then unleashes an artistic form or created object to transform the world in accordance with its intrinsic objectives. So this is a cosmos of a sentient awareness and consciousness that is alive, radiating and interacting, in which everything within it are emitting and communicating at their vibrational frequencies. Creation or creating in this cosmos and at this level requires knowledge and an awareness of existential reality. It entails an awareness of the world, and even knowledge itself is dynamic, conscious, and agential, meaning that it can act. Attunement to this character of knowledge is generally demonstrated by artists who are deemed highly inspired, who are aware that they are energy workers. It is manifest in how their cultures treat their forms of creative expressions. Such culturally rooted treatment and the relationship it commands are often understated, but it can be gleaned by observation. They map an aesthetic universe that is shaped by long-standing creative practices, artistic concepts, design consciousness, explanatory traditions, cultural values, knowledge about the world, and the grounding cosmogony. Within this spatiality, there is total understanding that at a very basic level, reality is constituted by energy, vital force, and or Achebe. This belief is evident in people's manner of organizing their life that demonstrates an understanding and their appreciation of the interconnectivity of life. In this cosmos of understanding of interconnectivity and interrelationships, deep philosophical concerns about art arises. Specifically, how do human creative expressions fit into the grand scheme of life to expand human objectives? In turn, it raises questions about how to create, what to create, and for what purposes. These are not idle questions. These are knowledge questions that demonstrate an awareness about the ripple effect character of life that are consistent with the foundational ontology of a people and that are in line with the articulation of the nature of being and existence. This context of deep awareness of life and existence defines an art that is routinely missed or ignored by anyone whose understanding of art is primarily pedestrian. So creativity ultimately rests on people's knowledge of their existential ideas and needs. So this dynamic matrix of interconnectivity defines the objectives of art in this space. Pivotal in these objectives are the messages they want disseminated, the things that they want changed, all of which are backed by a conception of art that everything rests on existential pivots that promote transformation, change, and the expansion of human possibilities. Hence, artists' imaginative ideas, careful designs, fabrications of sculptures, built environments, and performances fundamentally simulate insights that expand people's sensitivity and receptivity of the values of the reality around them, and to the embodied objectives and power of the created works of their respective cultures. So Achebe aesthetics derives from this philosophy of reality, transformation, and power. It conceptualizes artworks specifically for that existential context. Only works created in this basis and with transformational objectives in mind fall under this category, which is to say that many objects do not qualify. Those objects that are created with transformational intent are activated to initiate change, which they do by delivering their messages, meanings, and objectives. So outwardly, even though these forms may steer attention to their physical aspects, while simultaneously delivering their messages to unguarded receptors of the human body. So they present the physical, the messages, and the attractive elements, but at the same time, they are delivering the messages to unguarded receptors. With deep meaning as its load, Achebe aesthetics disseminates powerfully nuanced ideas about life and the intrinsic nature of reality. In a vitally dynamic knowledge, beauty is not the dominant goal. So when this conception of art is unhinged or unhinges art from beauty, it is not saying that beauty is not important, and that is beauty defined as visual, textual, or sonic attractiveness. Rather, it sets this understanding of beauty as a station on the march to an objective. Paintings can be beautiful, poetry and literature can be fascinating, but that is not merely its objective. It is just not the end goal of art. This conception of art automatically shifts our way of thinking and breaks the power of physical attractiveness as the defining objective of aesthetics. With art as significance, deep features about reality, aesthetics become much more than a worship of the outwardly physical, which may be visual, oral, auditory, and kinesthetic forms. It seeks higher meaning. It's about higher issues. Thus, limiting aesthetic creative expressions or art purely to their materiality or explaining them from a purely empirical standpoint, such as the Western aesthetic has done for African art, unravels the logic of these works. It obfuscates the full artistic vision and dims their force. Yet, art as Achebe infused or power impregnated speaks at multiple levels and registers. It prompts viewers, listeners, readers, dancers to decipher and gain an artistic appreciation of the full force of human potentialities. Now, the work now moves to exploring the full epistemological dimensions of Ashe. It also looks at the physical character of Ashe. It also anchors its explanation of what it means to activate and the role of voice vocalization, exhortation as a central feature of Ashe aesthetics. But let me fast forward because I know my time is limited. And what I'm going to do now is to take what I'm saying to two works that are current, two kinds of aesthetic evaluation. And so I'm going to begin with the Floyd mural in Minneapolis. In a sense, how does this even qualify as Ashe? In what forms and ways could we bring it under Ashe? An aspect of Ashe that I alluded to when I talked about the activation of works, without having the time and space to really explain what activation means and how the vocal is central and crucial to the activation of works. But some of that is going to emerge as I focus on this particular mural, which to all intents and purposes have nothing to do with Africa, has nothing to do with Ashe, but which I'm saying has very much to do with Ashe and very much to do with Africa. So Ashe aesthetic is a philosophy of artistic forms that coalesce, amplifies, and activates Ashe. So in this, Ashe aesthetics is this appropriate aesthetics that undermines and powers the Minneapolis public mural of George Floyd, painted by artists Zena Goldman, Candace Herrera, Greta McLean, Nico Alexander, Maria Harvest, and Pablo Helm Hernandez at the spot where Floyd was tragically murdered by a white policeman kneeling on his neck. This is an aesthetics, it is an aesthetics of powerfully charged works, evocatively challenging, inspiring, and redefining existential conditions. The Goldman-initiated mural produced to honor George Floyd occupies this role. While the the 6 artist team could have chosen a different aesthetics, which is one that goes for vengeance and horror, they move to the axis of creation to optimize the life-affirming elements of Ashe aesthetics. According to Herrera, we wanted to portray him in a positive light and as a hero to make sure his name was remembered. He explained that they chose the sunflower as a central motif to represent longevity and loyalty. Hence, but since the artists did not necessarily divulge the full meaning and significance of their design elements, there is much that Herrera did not disclose, which I'll try to do. Two important heritages underpin the choice of sunflower. These are Native American and African. For Native Americans who first domesticated the flower over 5,000 years ago, the sunflower is a symbol of courage and strength. Representing Floyd as a hero connects him to this aspect of the Native American heritage, given as well that it is in the land of the Dakota and Ojibwe that he died. But it is the African heritage that unlocks the meaning of the mural's design consciousness and why the flower was chosen in the first place. In the Americas, Afro-religion of Orisha worship, also referred to as Santeria in most of Spanish-speaking Americas, and in the Portuguese-speaking Brazil, we encounter candomblé. This Orisha worship construes the sunflower as the flower of Oshun, the divinity or Orisha of worship, purity, fertility, love, and sensuality. For diasporic Africans and many non-Africans in the Americas, the circular form and shape of the sunflower evokes Oshun's famous fan, which the Orisha utilizes to disseminate her objectives and influences. Arguably the most powerful Orisha in the Yoruba pantheon, according to Abiodun, Oshun is responsible for the sustenance of life on earth. Known for hair plaiting and hair grooming with her coral beaded comb, she rules the head, she adorns and influences the destinies of men and women, as well as other Orishas. In Catholic Spanish-speaking Americas, including the Caribbean, she is widely revered as Orisha Ochun, and in Catholic Lusophone Brazil as Ochun. It is significant that the artist chose the center of the sunflower. Okay. It is significant that they chose the center of the sunflower to cradle Floyd's head, which is his outer physical head. This darker center of the sunflower is important because it is the reproductive powerhouse of the sunflower, and because it is committing Floyd to its inner core of the Supreme Mother to whom he called at his moment of transition. Oshun is the first mother from whom all Odu derived. So in calling to Mama at his intense traumatic passing, Floyd invoked the Ashe of Oshun, the first and the head of all mothers, also known as the Grand and Mysterious Mother. He thereby activated the noiselessness and lack of ceremony of the hidden power of Oshun, whose covert and furtive power kills without striking and kills without a cry. So Oshun's holistic Ashe, a consequence of her being Aje, a powerful force possessed by women, is indispensable for the smooth running of the universe. Her unfathomable knowledge about the beginning of life and creation means that she and other mothers noiselessly deal with opponents, regardless of their aggressive force and power. Allusions of avenging mothers rest on two pivotal grounds. All women like Oshun are Aje and embody this inscrutable power. And Ekwe, intertwined and coexistence with Ashe, is available for deployment by avenging justice-seeking mothers. Although in the mural, Ekwe, which is the negative polarity of Ashe and subordinate to Ashe, nevertheless plays an important role. So here within this center, the artist had replaced the hundreds of disc flowers with the immature seeds at their base that make up this bed, with the names of victims of police killings: Tamir Rice, Philando Castile, Freddie Gray, Michael Brown, Breonna Taylor, to name a few. This substitution does two things. On the one hand, it likened these victims to the sunflower seeds that never got to the full-blown potential themselves. And on the other hand, it committed them to the corpulent, powerful bosom of the Supreme Mother, Oshun, for justice. Oshun's authority to dispense justice and her ability to cool and heal, or to strike and destroy, is an inscrutable attribute of her character and places her close to the prime mover, Olodumare. So committing Floyd to the power of Oshun means that he is not resting in power. He has become power personified, a potent force of change. The silent prayer the mural offers reverberates spatially and temporally, crossing boundaries and time, neither bound to a locality nor a temporal frame. Floyd's image signifies much more than an image of a man, amplifying the power of the prayer, and this prayer is the process of the activation of the mural itself. Are the bright orangish yellow petals framing the rim of the circular bed of names, as well as Floyd's own head. These are reminiscent of the decorative fringes of Oshun's fan that she utilizes to fan her decisions across the cosmos. The yellow color of the petals creates a halo of light that seemingly radiates outward from Floyd's inner head onto his face and then to the outline of his body, thereby shooting outwards in two directions, forming the letters of his name. Now, there's a long, extended analysis, but I'm going to kind of compact it a bit more, where when you begin to focus on the deceased head, which is reminiscent of some of the ways that the Ife terracotta and bronze head are created, you engage a type of creative treatment which idealizes Floyd's face. And this idealization is critical. It presents the face in an ageless manner, presenting a deceased in the most positive and flattering light, as if in the prime of life. This is produced to aid remembrance. The frontal direct gaze of the idealized face radiates a serene and dignified aura. It projects an aura of everlastingness. So the objective of this type of work, which is called iconography, is to memorialize. The mural's objective lies elsewhere. Its character emerges with the massive activation of the work upon completion. And we do remember the intense emotion that was released at the corner below and close to the point where this mural was located, which also happens to be the point where he died. So the intense emotion, I argue, is the activation of the Ashe dimension of this work. So the creation of the work produced an inert object on the work. But that inert object was then activated by the ways in which the community and the collectivity of people came together to reinforce and give life to the Ashe, which is to say that they sent this mural to release its message and begin to act on the world, which it did. So the multisensorial Ashe aesthetic reading of the mural reveals that its sensitivity that is calibrated to the moment. It speaks prophetically to the moral and political imperatives and the call and response strategy that in an older time is actually the process of the activation, which is the process of the calling and the amplification and intensification of the Ashe of this particular work, which was then unleashed. So like all things momentous, the self-selected artists of the projects were not cognizant of the historic role thrust upon them, nor were they fully aware of the meaning, syntax, and of nuances of their mural. But they produced in Ashe. And so their Ashe-impregnated mural was not just a public mural. It is a grief-stricken prayer, a prophecy, and a marker of an impending maelstrom. It alludes to the coming transformative change that will uproot the deep foundations of the heinous act visually captured for the world by 17-year-old Daniela Fraser. The muralist produced visual Ashe That is a thunderous, multisensorial, multi-layered unleashing of their share of a powerful symbol of change. The intensity of grief unleashed at the location of his death, cleansed and transmuted it into a site of power. White supremacy and racism will crumble, just as the transmutation of the site of sacrilege became hallowed ground. Oshu's cooling character catalyzes the energies of the people dreaming hope to apprehend reality. The next one has to do with the diversity Black Lives Matter, which is a routine, which I'm not sure many of you have seen, may or not. But it's a routine that is available and can be viewed online. Unfortunately, I am not able to play it for various technical reasons. So I'm going to move on to the analysis. I was going to play the video so you can see, but I can do my analysis without the video. A different contemporaneous example of a shared aesthetic is the powerful Black Lives Matter performance by the British dance troupe Diversity. The special dance routine took place at the semi-finals of the British Got Talent. Artistically, it began as a didactic reflection with a father retrospectively telling his young son about the events of 2020. This consisted of the COVID-19 outbreak, police brutality against Black people, the death of George Floyd, and the subsequent uprising, unequivocally stating that Black Lives Matter. The powerful routine was an explosive commentary on racial justice. The furious, fast-paced lyricism of twirling bodies, leaping, crouching, and kneeling magnified the routine's organized chaos. Fleet-footed dancers chased intoned lines of poetry, adding depth, color, and texture to the gripping performance. The outsized props, billowing smoke, streaming into the center of the stage like spirits, cacophonous sounds, stomping feet, flashing strobe lights, sonic shock waves, outsized photographic projections turned the massive, fiery, spinning spirals into a tour de force. Not surprisingly, the intensely powerful performance attracted fierce negative reaction from racially privileged detractors outraged by its racial justice message. Dance comprises rhythm and vibration. It brings dreams, forms to life. The visceral power of the dance heralded a long-delayed reckoning for racial justice and reparations. It recalled centuries of British slave trade of Africans, brutal plantation slavery in the Caribbean, then known as the West Indies, the sharp cuts of ruthless colonial violence in its far-flung territories, and of domestic terror and racial violence in numerous cities in England, such as London, Bristol, Liverpool, Manchester, and others. It recalls centuries of racial genocide and systemic racial oppression perpetuated against African, Indian, indigenous, and Asian peoples through policies and structures of white supremacy that were created in the crucible of colonialism. Thus, in the crucible of slavery and colonialism, the modernity, civilization, and democratic laws of this supposedly civilized nation are steeped in racism. Its modernity and rule of law preached a doctrine of inferiority of all races and of women. Those two pivots justify the sheer violence and brutality of slavery, the massacres of imperialism, and the maniacal punitive expeditions of colonialism. With the end of formal colonialism, these racist programs were deployed inward against immigrant enclaves in Britain, targeting them through police intimidation, brutality, killings, egregious economic exploitation, shameful Windrush duplicity, and anti-immigrant Brexit racism, and the deplorable treatment of the mixed-race Duchess of Sussex. Although Jordan Banjo explains that the dance presented a message of positivity and love, of a world that was better than the one they left behind, racially privileged detractors insisted the demand for racial justice is an attack on them. So while these distractors sought to maintain the status quo of exploitation, the disenfranchised new generation of warriors are informing all enemies of progress that we are not our ancestors. We will fuck you up. The power of diversity and its dance routine for racial justice lies in its harnessing of memory. The lead dancer, as an elder, passes on the history of his people to a child who symbolizes the next generation, for whom the Black Lives Matter movement is fighting for. The history is designed to satiate the child's quest for who are we, why are we here, and how did things change? It presents a full comprehensive history of the British Isles, not the doctored history that erases the presence of Blacks in this isle from the Roman times, and certainly not the one that conceals the centrality of Black labor in creating the wealth of Britain. The racial justice routine unleashes a multisensorial awareness that transcends unidimensional physical and temporal limitations. This multisensorial awareness manifests polychronal or Achebe spatiality that aids in speedily traveling across geographical spaces, swiftly recalling the past and affirmatively proclaiming its objectives. It is of a space-time that folds, weaves, overlaps simultaneously at the time of occurrence. Unleashed by the power of the anger of righteousness, the electrifying Achebe dance sets about dismantling falsehoods and filling the void with its iwa, or essential character. Now, Botswana dance healer Sitano Muburungianya Nyara explains that the powerful force Mlom, the equivalent of Achebe for the sun, is used for healing, hunting, removing societal tensions, and making reigns begin the transformational change process. According to him, as we dance, we start to change. We become different. If you concentrate on the dance, you start to change. You follow the song, the sound, and what it is saying. And for him, when I dance, the power comes to me. I can feel who is sick. I can make a diagnosis and start to heal. I start touching people and massaging them and healing them. Now, this is a conception of art, a conception of aesthetics, where art is vital. It moves, it works, it changes, it transforms reality. People who are really attuned feel it and can see what is going on and are able to engage in discussions about it. Dancing unleashes the electricity that is Achebe. The electrifying power cuts the restraining cords of subjectivity and individuation, opening the doors for multi-sensing and fusing with Achebe of the dance. Lead dancer and head of the troupe, Ashley Banjo, danced Achebe, and opened the world of possibilities that was not immediately obvious. Concentrating on the sound and motion of the dance, the phenomenal diversity dancers followed suit and accelerated the change process. The dance performed the dancers, who in performing the dance rode sonic waves that dissolve obstacles and barriers. And we're talking of physical obstacles and barriers that will be dissolved as the motion and the Achebe of this dance continues to move through a three-dimensional reality. In the same way that the Achebe of the George Floyd Mural continues the dismantling of the processes of slavery and racial injustice that has characterized North United States. So concentrating on the sound and motion of the dance, the dissolving of barriers continue. The dance activated with the sonic waves, vibrations amplified the dancers' prowess. The amplification strengthened their resolve as change agents, focused on bringing about a just world. Dancing or scripting in space unleashes electrifying vibrations. Dancing to the intense beat of the routine, the drum's vibration channeled energy through the dancers' bodies into one with Achebe. Dancing the Iwa of the dance, they performed perfection. So modern Western aesthetics focus reductively on visual formal elements, color, composition, choreography, textures, form, and beauty, ignoring the seen Achebe of power that controls the dance, the power of life. Under Achebe aesthetics, all constraining rationale of creation are exploded. The form becomes Achebe and the Achebe the form. Achebe aesthetics deploys all five senses and extrasensory ones, impressing on viewers multiple meanings, feelings, and spatialities in accordance with their psychological maturity and their own physical growth. It highlights the power of the Achebe field form object, which it emits around. The Achebe aesthetic scheme, the energy, vibration, and power of the dance is critical for healing the community and the well-being of humanity. So dance is the quickest path to Achebe. Dance is rhythm, and rhythm is Achebe. The Black Lives Matter routine is Achebe turbocharged. The power and dynamism of Achebe fortified dance releases pent-up frustration, redirects energy, and recalibrates what change should be. The weapon that diversity wielded and which was transmitted around the globe by television broadcast and the internet is one that no one can contain what has been disseminated. The eyes that saw the stomping feet, twirling bodies, explosive sounds, rhythmic shock waves, flashing lights, and the flaming spiral wheel are also the hearts that received the powerful message of transformation. Now, let me quickly begin to end, because there is more that goes on in this analysis, but I'll call it an end by recircling on the fact that Achebe aesthetics does not simply reside with those of Africa or those of African descent. It's a worldwide, global, universal phenomena that various cultures practice and execute. Achebe aesthetics warrants the creative expressions of a different conception of reality of seeing and of order of beingness in the world. It's speaking about a different conception of art, how we conceptualize art that is bigger than the physicality or the materiality of the object, but conceptualize it as an active force that possesses the powers to change the world. So I'm going to look at what others are doing that, in a sense, comes close to what we're talking about. So I'll be looking, as I mentioned earlier, the Mexican border artists and artist, Tanya Aguinina, focus on the title of her performance, Metabolizing the Body. And then Rafael Lozano Hema, who resides in Montreal, but creates at the border, did a border tuna. So this performance art of metabolizing the border by the US-Mexican border or Tromsø wall is one that on the one hand is focused on the fragility and the pain that such barriers bring about to communities who not just live there, but who owned that space before the ideological order of white supremacy was installed, where the territorial landscape was one that was free, one was not, that was unmarked, but marked by the natural forms, but not necessarily human erections that are designed to keep people apart. So this particular performance, which was constructed with objects of fragility like glass, and in which the artist Tanya wore a glass shoe to engage in an extended walk. And in the process, the glass shoe crumbled, the backpack crumbled, there's a whole crumbling of things, is a way of a metaphor and a statement of the crumbling of that barrier. The Achebe aesthetics that was being performed was the performance, and the objective was to metabolize, or is to metabolize that wall. And metabolize is to degrade, reduce things to its primary element, and then excrete it. So the one can say it's a prayer, but this goes beyond a prayer. A prayer seems to be something that you offer and hope. This is not a prayer. This is an Achebe-inspired performance, which is saying and stating unequivocally that this world will come down. The second artist created a context where light was projected to connect within a radius of 10 miles of Juarez, Mexico, and El Paso, United States. And for 12 days, the light was streaming from various points where people on one light project could speak and communicate their ideas to other multiple points, which is to say that the attempt to create a wall will not obstruct the connectivity that is part of our cosmos. Those barriers that seek to obstruct do not actually succeed in keeping people apart, but more importantly, that they would end up disintegrating and collapsing. So this is to say that the activation of Achebe of art forms ensures that the objectives of works will come to pass. And to the role and the meaning of Achebe aesthetics, or the objective of Achebe aesthetics, speaks to a world in which we, and utilizing art, we can profoundly and incisively change reality, rechannel ideas, assumptions about life, and in principally and conclusively remake humanity. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much. There is a lot going. So let me give you my own digital applause, if you don't mind. Thank you so much. And I'm hoping that there will be questions online in response to these extremely provocative and evocative ideas that you've sort of developed here. So thank you very much for that. And well, thanks for our audience too for sitting with us as we hear Professor Nzegwu out on these very fascinating and quite new, I would say, ideas. So while waiting for those questions, my aim has always been to try to keep things going. I have sort of put up a few questions of my own, and I have the authority of a technical director to ask them right now. So I'll start with one. I mean, there's a lot actually, and so still, even as we were going, I was still in a very high mood of, okay, you can go on and let's continue to talk about. We have a time limit, and the questions actually are meant to be some kind of dialogue, a way of extending some of the things that you've been saying. So I'll start with the concept that you used right at the beginning, which is this, what you call polychronal spatiality. So I'm wondering if you think that it is the same thing as the phenomenon that Soho, the late sociologist and theorist from the UK, well, from the Caribbean and the UK, what it describes in one of his works as being in but not of Europe with regards to those diasporic communities in the United Kingdom and in France, generally in Europe, in the wake of the migrations that came with the end of the Second World War. So in other words, do you think that what you call polychronal spatiality is the idea, the phenomenon of being in but not of Europe? So if it is, what do you think your own concept is adding to Soho's well-disseminated characterization? And if it is not, in what way does it differ? So that's the first question. And because it's fairly complex, I will wait to respond to that before I come to if there's a follow-up or another question. So thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, it's not.
Okay.
It can encompass it in ways in which it manifests, but it's not reducible to a diasporic consciousness. Okay. And that's because it was something that has always existed. Okay. It's ways in which we inhabit time and space, even in terms of our relationship to nature, our relationship to animals, our relationship to other cultures, and even our relationship to the other world. So there are multifarious ways in which it occurs. So it's not reducible to diasporic consciousness, but it takes up what is occurring in the context of the diaspora and the kind of diasporic consciousness that emerges from there as well. Okay. But this really goes back to the ways in which time has always been conceptualized in Africa and the various African cultures, the flexibility of time, the dynamism of time, and being able to recognize the ways in which this time-space dimension or time-space continuum works in a very flexible manner. So no, it's not anchored on the modernity reality or the reality of diasporic consciousness within the white supremacist ideology. It's okay. Not that. It's
okay, all right. So another question, I think I seen one online, but let me go on with this since it's a very central question, and I want you to sort of respond to this as well. So while you were speaking, you made a number of references to the work of the art historian Roland Abiodun, especially in his book Yoruba Art and Language, came out in 2014. And I recall that you published a long review essay about the work in the Journal of Art Historiography. So there's been there's been resistance to the ideas in the work, partly evident in the difficulty that the argument has encountered in being widely accessible. I mean, we're still waiting for a paperback edition of this book after about 7 years. So you're not responsible for that, of course, but my question is, what's your sense of how within scholarship you, how to confront this resistance, which as far as I can tell, is not direct or even explicitly operative, but very powerful and very effective all the same?
I share aesthetics, meaning that there's going to be resistance. And when we say I share aesthetics, is the idea and the assertion that when there is challenge to a normative order, the normative order always fights back, even when the normative order is ignorant of what other cultures are doing and saying. And that's because that normative order wants to retain priority of defining reality for every single person. And what his book is saying and doing is one that would undermine the relevance of the trajectory of aesthetics that is the dominant scope at the moment. It's a trajectory of aesthetics that forces us as Africans to look away from what obtains in Africa, to downgrade the philosophies of Africa, and to enter into the theoretical minds of their theoreticians who have no clue about what Africa is doing, but who retains the right and the privilege to define without any apologies to what Africa is saying. So if the book is inaccessible, that is not a bad commentary on the book. It's a bad commentary on the scholarship that we presently have, that people have neglected, devalued, denigrated, degraded the importance of Africa simply because we want to, as Pella said, perform the follow-follow. But we cannot keep performing the follow-follow if you want to know yourself. So the inaccessibility of the argument is not a critique. There's a lot of inaccessibility in the works of Derrida or Foucault or some of the Russian writers. But people spend time. They find it of value and as something that they would read, understand, and theorize, and they stop to do that. But never when it comes from the African perspective. And guess what? I have no problems with that. And I do not respect that position because it's a position that is built on white supremacy, oppression, domination. And the last time I checked, I don't check those boxes.
Okay, all right. Well, that's fair enough. There are people online who are really very engaged and quite appreciative of what you've been doing in the last 1 hour. So I'll have their questions across to you. The first is from a listener called Uti Nyan. And the question is, since Ashe aesthetics is a creative impulse, as a creative impulse inspires much of African art and creativity, could you speak more on how this impulse inscribes itself in forms of representation like written literature? So take that. Do you want to take that, or do you want me to put up another question?
That question is going to the minutiae, which I cannot actually do at this moment, because now it will warrant me moving into the sections I had hopped over, which is the sections on the epistemology and the epistemic aspects of this Ashe, on the metaphysicals of the Ashe, on the ethical of the Ashe, and how all of that comes together. But what I had tried to do by moving to discussing the two art forms, that of the mural, which is painting, and that of dance, which is vibrational kinesthetic, those are not the areas that that people will normally bring together. but which I try to bring together to show how in those different ways it's inscribed in those works. But even in doing that presentation, there are other detailed aspects I have had to skip over, which when you do read the paper, which is now becoming much more than a paper, then it becomes clearer. So because there's a general audience out there, I don't want to get mired in the specifics, but the specifics are already in the work itself.
Okay, all right. So our next question is from another listener called Yana Makua. And the question is, the examples you gave seem all to be from all forms of protest art and art or art that is politically engaged or motivated. Can you talk about how these aesthetics might appear in work that might not be outwardly protest works, but still imbued with the kind of transformational power that you speak about?
Well, okay. Process work, process art, I don't buy those definitions. It works in a different context. It doesn't work in mine. But I hear the terminology, but I want to put it out there. I don't get engaged in that analysis. Political art is another terminology that is also typically utilized to categorize and to shunt into places works that people don't want to engage in. Every art is political because life is political. When people don't like your politics, your art is rendered political art and shunted to a specific area. Those areas that are presented as not having politics actually speak their own politics, just that A, nobody is emphasizing the political dimensions of those art, or they are downplaying the political significance because they want people to look in a different direction. Art for me is art. And in every art, even the ones that appear not to be political, there, and which is part of their shape, there is that political aspect of life that is embedded, which is the political dimension of the transformation of life, of change, the ways in which life works, and how do you define politics or political. So when you break down that definition, that word political, to its basic elements, we are dealing with how we live our lives. And in how we live our lives, works occur to speak to them. The artists who are creating at the border, they are not calling their border, oh, we're creating political art. They are going beyond those terminologies. They are resituating art, in a sense, taking art from the restraining confines of Western aesthetics that has sucked it of life and placed it there as an arid object that cannot interact or do anything, that has become centered. That is a provincial idea, understanding, and definition of art. Put that to the side. Look at the ways in which the totality of humanity in different parts of the world, in different historical epochs have created. That should be a central understanding and definition of art. And within that understanding and definition, elements about life can be approached, and the creative process speaks to transformation. So whatever work you talk about, once it's activated, performs a role. And my argument is not just sits on the table looking pretty, but actually at the element of vibrational levels, at the energy level, is also communicating through the enveloping field of Achebe to other objects, including to humans themselves. humans are not attentive to their environment. They not see, because of the complexities of life and the pressures of everyday living, very few people take a backseat to really understand and see the ways in which life is so interconnected, and which things that speak to us that we may not even think about are actually in communication. So when the human isn't engaged in communication, the human says nothing is communicating, except when it talks in the way they are accustomed to talking. But the objects do communicate. The trees do communicate. The minerals do communicate. The crystals do communicate. You have to get and see their vibrational registers. So the world in which I'm thinking, understanding, recentering art is one that moves in this multi-leveled space.
Okay, all right. So 3 more questions. I'll take them one by one. They are actually kind of related. The first 2 are related. The first is by a listener called Achebe, 1. So the question is, this is an enlightening, thank you. This is an enlightening lecture, a powerful reminder of the enduring and even obscured connection between the mother continent and the diaspora. And so this listener wants you to speak a bit more about what goes on in the vital force and the interstices of the spatialities and temporalities you talked about in the work. So could you speak a bit more about what goes on in the interstices of the spatialities and temporalities? These are actually big words, but that's fine, that you so eloquently interrogate in your talk. So that's one, because it's complex. I would let you take that first, and then we'll come to the second question.
Oh, give me the 2, because they may overlap.
Yeah, to some extent, actually, I think. So that's fine. So, and this is by Adeleke Adieko, someone whom I'm sure you, a name you're familiar with. So it's saying that if Ashe expresses a vitalism, was wondering whether you want to think about it as a variant of contemplative vitalism. And then
the concept of vitalism.
Yeah, of contemplative vitalism. I actually was also listening to that, and the first questioner actually speaks about the vital force. And actually, when you're speaking, I'm wondering, wait, is this magic? If you say that, it's there, so how is it there? How is it manifested? And so the idea is that if you could talk about it, think of it as a variant of contemplative vitalism. And actually a third question may also be similar. So let me put this, you can put it aside or you can find a way of integrating it. And it's by a speaker, a listener called Victoria Delany, and say, is Ashe willed or is it always present in creative works? So whether it's literary, whether it's plastic, whether it's kinetic. So the idea is that, is it willed? Is it a process, or is it always present, latent in a given work? So I think, in a sense, I think those questions may be related, but if you don't think so, you might just compartmentalize them and answer them as they occur to you. So thank you.
Okay. Let me begin with with the last.
Oh,
and
okay.
then go back, because they build on each other. I gave a set of things about Ashe. It's a willed, it could be a prayer, it could be a force. There's a multiplicity of meanings. One word stands for many things, which is why I said in the beginning that we now need to, in a sense, take a back seat and then listen closely and acutely to the different ways in which the Ashe means. So sometimes Ashe speaks about a life force that envelops the world. So everything in life, so at its very basic element, Ashe is all about life. The energy of life, the vital force of life, the vibration about life. Then Ashe could also mean power. How power is exercised, how power exists. It could also talk about willing. So at each particular moment, you now begin to move from one level to the other level and to the next. So the first level of the foundational level where Ashe is, you can think of it as the constituent of the universe. In the beginning was Ashe. So you can think of it as that, and that is out of Ashe that every single thing was created. So he's talking about Ashe as a force. But of course, this particular force has its own essence and its own dynamic, unique nature. And this is why then it moves to the next level, where it now can become a prayer, when in a sense you carve out a particular desire, and in praying about it and trying to will it into being. What is a prayer? Try to will something into reality, something that will change whatever it is we're seeking for, or whatever it is that may be hindering us in certain ways. We offer a prayer to remove it. So it's a case of trying to will change, to will transformation. So because I'm not using the word prayer doesn't mean that those fundamental elements of what it's about is gone. Religion puts prayer and then people get attracted by religion and prayer and they do this. Strip it of religion, which is what I'm doing. Ashe then becomes that particular force or energy that you can then coalesce, intensify, and direct it. Because the character of Ashe, that's the character of that life force, is one that manifests change, is the power of change, is the power to bring things into reality. So, and then you can move to the other level where you now either narrow your discussion and begin to look at how it manifests around the world. How does one demonstrate the Ashe? When they enter a space, how do they, in a sense, command the space, which is exude their energy, their vibration, and command the space. All of that is Ashe. But you are talking at various registers. You are talking of ways in which what we began with at the unitary basic level morphs and changes, but is still irreducibly what it is. Now you enter the world of creation. The artist who's creating is literally interjecting themselves into the project of creativity, which is, for example, the sculptor who carves of wood. So you have the living tree that has been cut and the tree is dead, okay? But that death doesn't mean or imply the irrelevance of things. Death is still another state of existence, because as those disintegrate, as the tree disintegrates, it's going to release elements of itself. You can call it molecules, you can call it chemicals or minerals that go back into the soil, that replenishes the soil, and something else will grow and draw from it. So it's endless cycle of sustainability. So the tree is dead. No, the tree changed its form. It's no longer alive in the way we know it, but the tree does still have Ashe, which is the life force in it. Now the artist comes and takes the seasoned wood that's been out in the rain and has been seasoned, brings it into his or her studio, and is going to begin carving. But the artist now has to ask him or herself, what am I going to produce? So you're going to produce something using a medium to imprint your own ideas, and your ideas are actually intangible forms that you could say reside in your head or your body, but it's still Ashe in a different sense. So now you're going to take that and concretize it. And so when you concretize it, you have introduced something new into the world, which is why art speaks to kind of individuation and individuality. So each thing that is created has its own individuality, even as it's part of the species of a tree. If the sculptor was creating a lot of wooden objects. So there is some uniformity, but there's still individuality and originality in each specific works. So the creator does that. But having created it, he has the life force or the Achebe of the artist's ideas that I want to input into this wood form. But he also has the Achebe of the wood itself that is there. How do you then bring the two together to bring it to life? This is where the activation comes in, which is why in the Achebe, you may have all these things there, but you require that of activation. And the activation is what you speak. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. It's in the Christian Bible, okay? But that is talking about a deeper metaphysical principle about the origin of life and transformation and how you bring things into existence. Now, bringing things into existence sounds like being a magician. So when we talk of Achebe aesthetics, people are going to say, you're doing magic.
That's right.
If I create a painting, I've done magic. When I charge my paintings that if anybody buys it, this is going to happen, that's magic. So oftentimes we apply certain terminologies to things we don't understand and making a mystery out of something where no mystery resides. And the mystery comes from jumping over so many steps in the act of producing or creating. Now, the same goes for when we live our stressful lives and we don't attend to everything around us. It never occurs to us how much of life we edit out. We don't see it. It doesn't even register. And oftentimes people may be so consumed by a crisis or something, somebody is standing in front of them, they didn't see the person. That speaks to the level of attention and attentiveness we bring to life. What I'm saying is that because our contemporary life and reality is one in which we are so stressed out, we hardly ever attend to things to see the connections that are there and to see the ways in which things are interacting. And so when I say that the bird talked to me, or the ancient person in the Leicester village says the bird was talking, oh my God, there's something wrong with them. They are in voodoo or doing that. What is actually being articulated is a level of attentiveness to the world around us. I see this blue jay coming every time. And you try to understand the significance of the blue jay being there and what is communicating. And it is through that close attention that elements of nature is unraveled to us. For example, in Ethiopia, which is the home place of coffee, humans didn't know about coffee before. The monk was watching and saw the goats eating these berries. And after eating the berries, they go into really excited state. And then he decided to take some to try. And that, the rest became history. By carefully watching our environment, the communications, the ways in which other animals interact with others reveal a lot of things to us. Same goes in the realm of art. That when we create and place our objectives on it, we can then say, these works work. And then somebody could say, how do you know that these works work? Talk to some of the artists. And I'll give you a brief example. I won't mention the name. An artist living in America, African American, could create a work, did create a work on which she had tied up the principal who was a problem to her and placed her in the midst of the elaborate form she created. She knew what she wanted to happen. When she finished the work, and one can say, well, did it work? Yes, it did work. The week she finished that work, that week, the principal was moved out of the school. Then you could say, oh, is she a babalawo? And I would say, that is, or Iyarifa, that, as far as I'm concerned, is a different ball of question. What I'm talking about is the ways in which, if you concentrate on what you are doing in producing the work, and in which some people in literature take their work seriously, know what they're writing, write it in a way, those works reverberate. Why is it that some works speak so much about us, and yet another work does not carry the same resonance? But they were all written. So those are the kind of questions that you begin to ask to find out in what ways did that other work that really spoke to people, or that other poetry spoke to people, what gave its longevity? What gave it its vitality to continue? And I'm not speaking of the contemporary reality of North American publishing, where your work gets visibility if the gatekeepers agree to it, and if it's consistent and in conformity with what the white supremacist ideology sanctions. That is not what I'm talking about. So I'm talking about works in which how we create and get the kind of success and impact that many people don't even know actually happened. Those are the kind of stories, and those are the kind of things that I'm bringing to the fore. I have curated exhibitions with some of those kind of ideas as the premise of my exhibition, two in major spaces, one in the United States, one in Florida, in contemporary art spaces, and they resonated and they carried their objectives. So, but you have to take a back seat to be able to see what happens. And so the question that goes to contemplative vitalism, I beg to differ. And so I'm not differing. I beg to say, I don't know what contemplative vitalism is. I don't know who theorized vitalism. And that theorization of vitalism, until I look at it and see what they're talking about, I'm not ready to subscribe to it. Because I don't know the epistemic framework or the conceptual framework within which it found its home. Who are the theoretical pivots? What are the ideas that are central to that contemplative vitalism? Which type of cosmogony, ontology is it advocating?
Do you want me to play devil's advocate with this question?
You can play devil's advocate.
Okay, all right. Okay, so here's what I'm saying. Especially in terms of how vitalism is understood. If you want, in your own vocabulary within modernism, it will be the work of Henri Bergson, the French writer, and was very influential to the work of Senghor. And there's actually more recent work by people like Bashir Diagne that talks about relationship between, I think the book came out in 2019 called The Post-Colonial Bergson, essentially trying to establish a connection between the concept of vitalism and especially in the work of Senghor. And to be honest with you, as I listened to you talking about how essential spirit is activated in nature, I was hearing a bit of the early Senghor too, maybe the Sengoria kind of negritude, not in those general specific way, but there are ways in which there are aspects of the work. So maybe that's what this person who is asking the question is suggesting. And if that's the premise, is this something that you want to respond to?
Senghor's work has also been theorized from the the Senegalese standpoint, which is and I'm thinking of the work of Cheikh Thiam.
Okay, yeah.
Cheikh Thiam, who's Senegalese and who's Wolof. And so in a sense, is looking at, and part of what is informing some of his theorizations come from the Wolof perspective, okay? Even though Senghor, I don't think he's Wolof, but-
No, he's Seré.
He's Seré, so he's not Wolof, but he's bringing elements of that Wolof ideas, but the Wolof and the Seré are not so disjointed that you will not find overlaps. So at that level, I can see some of that coming in, okay? So the Senghor that is presented in these new iterations of scholarship, and some of the Senghor that we have heard in the past are not necessarily the two Senghors. So I am more susceptible to listening to that, but I'm still not ready to hitch my wagon on any vitalism theory. And you know why? Okay. Because once you make that move to say vitalism, whether you put contemplative, you are on your highway to Europe and Europology, which is why I take time to hitch it to the African wagon, which is, let's look at Achebe. And when we get to Achebe, let's look at some of those other concepts, which of course I do utilize in the work because I want the direction of attention, of theorizing, of epistemology to go in that and uncover more of the things that are there. I am tired of being in Europology. I am centering myself in the African space. And for me, centering myself in the African space does not imply that I cannot utilize Yoruba concepts or Khoisan song concepts, or even Seré or Wolof concepts. I want them in their original names, theorized, so we really understand what they are about. That's where my wagon is going to be hitched. Anything that is speaking Onyibo, in that sense, which is English, French, there is ways in which the metaphysics of those cultures overwhelm and take over. And before I realize it, what I'm saying is already being distorted. And what I'm saying is not being anchored in the imaginary of a white theoretician. I don't want to go there anymore.
Okay.
Now, the last one is what goes on in those interstices. Now, that's where we now begin to really understand elements of the more advanced aspects of the African philosophy. Now, I spent quite some time looking at even some of the, when you're calling of the advancement in physics. And people are talking about, what's the concept that is oftentimes used, like, kind of the new dimensions of physics. And I've listened to some of what the healers, whether it's the Babalawas or the DBS talking about. I hear convergences. Now, my concern and my interest is, what is the structure and the system of knowledge that underpins what they're saying? And what is it, and how is it that they're able to talk about things with such clarity and assuredness than everyday people the contemporary Africans who have become so Christianized or Islamized. No. So I'm more intent on uncovering those systems of knowledge, giving them the seriousness they deserve, trying to understand what they're talking about, and when they talk about being in two spaces at the same time, what exactly are they talking about? Because the people who are making those claims are not superficial people. These are people who are aged, very deliberative, recognized in the communities as authorities. What do they mean? What is happening when they talk about those possibilities, those conceptualization of space that problematizing the old Newtonian physics, but is more in tune with the Einsteinian physics? How do we reconfigure space? Most of what goes on in contemporary thinking in Africa and of African studies is anchored on the Newtonian physics. But what the Babalawos and things are talking about actually go outside of Newtonian physics and are more in tune and in line with the Einsteinian ones. And it's not just in Africa, and it's not just in Asia. So there is something going on there, and we need to really conduct investigations to understand it, talk about it, because I believe it offers a new paradigm for living our lives beyond the one that was structured in the crucible of racism and colonialism.
Okay, well, we're actually out of time, and there are a few more questions that I will ask. This is really very, when I say provocative, I don't mean it negatively. I mean it in terms of being thought-provoking. And so we thank you very much for sharing this material with us. It's obviously material that is going to get a lot of traction as we go, both positive traction, and the ones that have been a scholar who is very seasoned will not be the one that you might characterize as resistant. But I mean, you've thrown your heart in the ring, and we go away, and wish you a lot of strength with that.
Let me make a quick comment.
Okay, please.
Some of what I theorized 20 years ago.
Oh, okay.
It's currently what people are talking about today.
All right.
So I'm quite attuned to the idea that I may be 20 years ahead.
Okay, well, that's a good way to look at it. That's good. Anyway, thank you very much, and thanks to our listeners and audience, wherever part of the world you happen to be logging in. We appreciate your attention, and we're very sorry for the brief late. The slow start at the beginning. We're like 5 minutes to go in. We're just basically trying to figure out the technical interface, but we got there, and we appreciate your attentiveness and staying with us. So that ends it for this month, and we'll be back this station around this time next month. So thank you very much, and have a good rest of your day. Thank you. Bye.